Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's dive into this. Imagine an explosive military standoff that gets dismantled not by a massive army and not by some brilliant tactical maneuver, but by a single, totally unexpected choice made in the pitch dark. We are looking at an absolutely fascinating ancient narrative from the wilderness of En Gedi, found right in the book of 1 Samuel. It's a story that perfectly encapsulates the intense dynamics of power, extreme vulnerability, and just incredible self-mastery. We're going to break down this super high-stakes encounter between a volatile king named Saul and a renegade warrior named David, really to see exactly how true authority often lies not in the power to destroy, but in the power to restrain. Let's get right into it.
I want you to genuinely think about this for a second. If your absolute worst enemy, someone who has relentlessly hunted you down to ruin your life, someone who represents a constant, terrifying threat, was suddenly entirely at your mercy, what would you do? This isn't just a philosophical hypothetical. This is the exact, terrifyingly real situation David finds himself in. By framing the story through this lens, we immediately understand the intense psychological pressure of the moment. We are essentially putting ourselves right there in the shadows with David, where a literal life or death decision has to be made in a fraction of a second. The stakes here are just terrifyingly asymmetrical. On one side, as our source text details, King Saul has mobilized 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel. Now that is a massive, elite military force. They're armed to the teeth and operating with the full backing of the state. On the other side, we have David and this small band of men. They're desperate, they're cornered, and they are hiding deep in the sides of a cave up on the rocky cliffs of the Wild Goats. It is a suffocating, claustrophobic hiding place. The sheer overwhelming power of a national military is bearing down on this tiny group of fugitives trapped in the dark. But then, we get this unbelievable twist of fate. Saul leaves his elite strike force outside and enters a cave by the sheepcotes to cover his feet, which is basically an ancient euphemism for relieving oneself or taking a rest. He is entirely alone, he's unarmed, completely distracted, and totally unaware that he has just stepped into the exact cave where his prey is hiding. Just imagine the sheer, heart-pounding tension of this moment. The most powerful man in the kingdom has unknowingly delivered himself in his most intensely vulnerable state right into the hands of the very man he's trying to kill. Almost immediately, the peer pressure hits in the dark. David's men start whispering to him, "Behold the day of which the Lord said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand." They aren't just telling David to attack. They're interpreting this shocking coincidence as a divinely ordained opportunity. They are framing vengeance as a righteous duty, telling David that this is his big moment to do to Saul as it shall seem good unto him. The pressure to strike, to just end this grueling military pursuit with one quick, silent motion, is absolutely immense. Watch how this builds. David silently arises in the darkness. He creeps forward, getting close enough to the king to actually hear him breathing, close enough to touch him. He reaches out, and he cuts off the skirt of Saul's robe, privately, meaning in secret. But then, he doesn't strike Saul. Instead, the text tells us his own heart smotes him. His conscience unexpectedly and violently strikes him, simply because he damaged the king's garment? Even in the face of his worst enemy, even when presented with what looks like a golden opportunity to seize power, his internal moral compass triggers this massive alarm. So, the crucial point is understanding exactly why David's conscience stopped him. He refers to Saul as the Lord's anointed. Now, this isn't just some political title, it denotes a deep spiritual reverence. In David's eyes, Saul's position was established by a higher power, making the king fundamentally untouchable by human hands. To strike Saul wasn't just to kill an enemy, it was to cross a very rigid spiritual and hierarchical boundary. David realizes he cannot usurp authority through violence, no matter how convenient or seemingly justified the moment might feel. True leadership, he decides right then and there, cannot be built on an act of assassination. And that brings us to a moment of incredible leadership. David doesn't just manage his own restraint, he actively de-escalates a group of hardened, terrified men who are eager for blood. He physically and verbally restrains his own followers from attacking the king, telling them, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master." He holds the line of his convictions under literally the most extreme pressure imaginable. Because of this astonishing discipline, Saul unknowingly finishes his business, rises up out of the cave, and simply goes on his way, completely oblivious to how close he just came to death. But the story doesn't end in the shadows. What happens next is breathtaking. David makes the incredibly dangerous decision to step out of the absolute safety of that cave. He reveals himself in broad daylight to the very man hunting him, crying out, "My lord, the king." And when Saul looks behind him, David does something totally shocking. He stoops with his face to the earth and bows himself. He adopts a posture of absolute, radical submission. He could have been killed right then and there by Saul's surrounding army, but he uses this ultimate display of vulnerability to force a much-needed conversation. And this brilliantly illustrates his point. David holds up the severed fabric. "See the skirt of thy robe in my hand. I killed thee not." It is undeniable physical proof of his ultimate mercy and innocence. He is showing Saul, visually and indisputably, that he was close enough to cut his clothes, which means he was certainly close enough to cut his throat, but his eye spared him. The fabric becomes the ultimate evidence that there is neither evil nor transgression in David's hand. It's this brilliant psychological maneuver. David proves that he possesses power precisely by showing that he actively chose to withhold it. Notice how David masterfully uses extreme humility here to completely disarm the situation. He asks, "After whom is the king of Israel come out? After whom dost thou pursue?" And he actually calls himself a dead dog and a flea. He's intentionally contrasting his own perceived insignificance with Saul's immense status as the sovereign king of Israel. It's almost comical when you really think about it. A powerful monarch mobilizing an elite national army of 3,000 men just to hunt down a single flea. By highlighting the sheer absurdity of this situation, David makes Saul's relentless aggression look entirely unreasonable. The impact of this is instantaneous and overwhelming. Saul cries out, "Is this thy voice, my son David?" And he lifts up his voice and he weeps. This is a profound emotional breaking point. Saul's entire aggressive militaristic pursuit completely crumbles right here in the dust. Confronted by the undeniable reality of radical mercy from the exact man he was trying to destroy, the king's armor of paranoia and hatred just shatters. He doesn't bark a tactical command. He doesn't order his men to attack. The most powerful man in the nation just breaks down in tears. Saul is suddenly struck by this stark realization of his own villainy. He openly declares to David, "Thou art more righteous than I." He explicitly contrasts their morality, acknowledging that David rewarded him with good by sparing his life, whereas Saul frankly admits, "I have rewarded the evil." It is a stunning moment of clarity. Saul recognizes aloud that standard human nature dictates that if a man finds his enemy, he doesn't just let him walk away safely. David's righteous restraint has completely upended the expected rules of conflict, forcing Saul to face his own broken moral compass. And from that realization comes a stunning prophetic admission from the king himself. Saul surrenders not just the moment, but the future. He says, "I know well that thou shalt surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in thine hand." By witnessing David's restraint and his refusal to seize power through violence, Saul recognizes that David's character has proven him ultimately worthy of the throne. It is a profound insight into leadership. True authority and lasting influence require exactly the kind of self-control and ethical grounding that David just demonstrated in that cave. Because Saul knows David is inevitably going to take power, he immediately moves to secure his own legacy, begging David for 3 specific things. First, he asked him to swear by the Lord, which makes the agreement legally and spiritually binding. Second, he pleads, "Do not cut off my seed," meaning do not execute my descendants, which, by the way, was a brutal but super common practice when a new dynasty took over in the ancient world. And third, to preserve his name out of his father's house. Saul leverages this fragile moment of clarity to legally protect his future lineage from the very retribution he himself had been trying to inflict. So the crisis is peacefully diffused. David swears the oath to Saul, agreeing to the terms of mercy and securing the king's bloodline. Saul turns around and goes home, taking his massive army of 3,000 elite soldiers with him. Meanwhile, David and his men return safely to the hold. A situation that began with a suffocating, totally lethal military threat ends with everyone walking away alive. They achieve a peaceful, physical separation, and they honor this newfound resolution, entirely because of one man's unwavering commitment to restraint when violence would have been so easy. I want to leave you with a thought directly from David himself. In the middle of his defense outside the cave, he quotes an ancient proverb, "Wickedness proceedeth from the wicked." His point was simple. He wouldn't act wickedly, because that's just not who he is, regardless of what Saul was doing to him. So what about us? Will you let your enemies define your actions, or will you choose restraint? David proved that true power isn't taking revenge just because you have the opportunity. It's having the strength to withhold your hand. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it leaves you with something profound to think about today.